So thanks everybody for coming this morning. I've been advised that I have to move pretty quickly because everybody needs to be out of here by 11. So I'll move through these slides quite quickly. But what I'm really here to talk about is the Apprenticeship Office and its functions and some of the compliance activities that it undertakes at the moment and has done over the past 18 months or so since it became the Apprenticeship Office, 12 months. So 1 July 2015, the Commonwealth Government, and this sort of carries on with some of those themes that Mr Lavarch and Simon and the panel upstairs were talking about, this duplication of roles and responsibilities between the different tiers of government and the various regulators, etc. So just to take you on a bit of a history lesson, on 1 July 2015 last year, the Commonwealth brought in a new range, a different model, I guess, called the Australian Apprenticeship Support Network Providers. Formerly they were called the Australian Apprenticeship Centres, and the Commonwealth changed that model largely because they thought the completion rates of apprenticeships and traineeships across the nation were quite low, notwithstanding that the completion rates in Western Australia for apprenticeships and traineeships were above the national average. But the whole idea of the new ASN, I'll call them, Australian Apprenticeship Support Network Providers, was to increase their function and role. So prior to that, what the ACS used to do was just primarily do the sign-up function, or sign the apprentices and traineeships, sign their training contract up and then forward that training contract on to the department. But under the new model, so from 1 July 2015, the Commonwealth decided that these ASNs would play a greater role in support and mentoring functions for the apprenticeship, or for the apprentice, trainee and the employer through the course of that training contract. So with that expanded role, our department, or the state government, formerly ApprenticeCentre, had to really have a look at our function, our role and function. We undertook a functional review and really looked at what we did. Clearly there was going to be some duplication and crossover between what the Commonwealth ASN providers did and what the ApprenticeCentre also did. So the ApprenticeCentre presented itself as the one-stop shop. Any problems with your apprenticeship or traineeship, come to us and we'll solve your problem or point you in the right direction. After this review, and in order to sort of alleviate some of that duplication, we decided to really focus our role on administering the training contracts and regulating the system, as opposed to being that broad sort of one-stop shop. So just to put it in a more of a diagrammatic sort of way, that diagram, I'm not sure if you can read it, it is on our website if you're interested. It sort of shows how we sort of went about it, that demarcation between the Australian government or the ASN providers and what the Apprenticeship Office would be delivering. So largely, if you look at that blue side on the right-hand side, that's the Apprenticeship Office. We register the training contracts, we do the terminations, we do some dispute resolution, we do assessments of the training contracts, and we do monitoring of the system. Whereas the ASN providers on the left-hand side, they do a lot of that pre-matching of the apprenticeships, provide information to employers, making sure that there's a right fit there, the training and the employment and the job placement, etc. And then they do the sign-up. And then once that training contract's lodged with the department, then we take the administration of those training contracts. So our objectives, now I'm talking about the Apprenticeship Office, our objectives are trying to be as efficient in those administrative functions of the training contract as possible. And when I say administration, that's kind of a broad term for, registration of the training contract, suspension of the training contract, completion of the training contract, variations to the training contract, etc., etc. There's statutory obligations, that administrative function that we carry out. So one of our objectives is to do that as efficiently as possible. But the second point there is about creating a regulatory environment that supports apprenticeships and traineeships and improves, and this goes back to that theme upstairs, improves the quality and the integrity of the system. We really, as Simon pointed out upstairs, that quality question keeps coming up time and time again. If we can improve the quality, then a lot of these other issues fall away. So improving the quality, integrity, and making sure that the public have confidence in the apprenticeship system. So just some of the numbers. There's about 40,000. Actually, it's probably a touch about 39,000. It's still contracting, the numbers of training contracts that we administer. It's a good indication of how the economy is going more generally, I think, looking at these apprenticeship numbers. It's been contracting for maybe about 2 years in this state. We receive about 120 training contracts daily for registration. And on average, we take about 6 days to register those training contracts when they come in the door. So they're large numbers that we deal with. 4,000 variations to the training contracts. So when we talk about variations, we're talking about changes to the RTO, changes to addresses, changes to qualifications along the course of that training contract. And we also have a call centre which takes between about 100 and 200 phone calls a day. That doesn't include the emails, etc. that we get. So it's a busy office, processing lots of these administrative functions that we carry out. So I just want to talk about our compliance. So compliance was something that we always had the power to do under the relative statute and regulations. Not something we always did as a matter of course, but we've certainly, as I said, since we've changed to the Apprenticeship Office, it's something we're focusing more on. And it's ultimately underpinning it all is about improving the quality of the training. So this is a fairly standard compliance pyramid that a lot of regulatory agencies use. That bottom tier is about education and prevention. That's where the large part of the people that we deal with, we try and educate and prevent non-compliances happening. Some people drift up into the second tier, and we hope to we deter them through detection and help them to comply. And then there's that top tier. So there's penalties right throughout the statute, penalties for all sorts of things, breaches of the statute that we can enforce. We haven't enforced any since we've been the Apprenticeship Office. Largely, we're trying to educate and prevent those areas of non-compliance. So just for your benefit. So some of the compliance activities, and this does relate to training providers. Mr. Lavarch upstairs talked about ASPA being the regulator for training providers. However, you should be aware that our area, or the state government, or the vocational education and training sector does touch on some instances where we do have regulatory powers over RTOs. And this is one of them, training plans. So what the legislation says is that the training plan must be signed off by the parties. That includes the RTO, the apprentice and the employer within 6 weeks of that training contract being registered. The training plan is fairly straightforward. If you ever want to look at the regulation, sets out the who, what, when, where and how the training will take place. So in 2012 we looked at it and there was about 4,000 overdue training plans. That's not a big number in the scope of things. I guess it's 1%, less than 1% of the training contracts. But 4,000 is still 4,000, and without a training plan, I'm not sure how RTOs do their training. It's a foundation document. It's in the regulations. It's a document that must be adhered to according to the regulations. So we worked on that, the compliance teams, and we've got that number down to about 300 in December 2015, which is quite good. So that was just looking across the system at the number of overdue training plans. And then what we decided to do is start looking at the quality of the training plans. So we called in 196 training plans just randomly across the sector. And what we found was there was only about 40% of those training plans actually complied with the regulations. So that's a bit scary as well. Again, the training plan is a fundamental document for the training. Who's going to deliver the training, what the on and off the job requirements are, what the competencies are, where the training is going to be held, who's going to deliver. So those fundamental questions about the training we only found that 40% of the sample survey that we took met those requirements, which is a bit scary. And the other fundamental thing is that all the parties must sign it within 6 weeks. So that's the employer, the apprentice and the RTO. So we're going to do some future work on that as well. Again, trying to educate stakeholders around their requirements. Another area where we've looked at is contract lodgement. This doesn't necessarily relate to training providers. But what the legislation says is that the training contract must be lodged with us, the department, within 21 days of commencement. Again, when we looked at it in 2012, there was only 54% of people complying with this requirement. And what that does, if the training contract's not lodged with us, it delays the training, it infuriates RTOs, etc. So it has this sort of cumulative effect. We've done quite a bit of work in that space as well, and now we have about 75% lodged within 21 days, which is a stark improvement. And so this has largely been working with those ASIN providers, because largely it's their job to do the sign-up, or it is their job to do the sign-up and to lodge those training contracts in the appropriate timeframe. This is an area that we've done a lot more work on since we've become the Apprenticeship Office. Prior to becoming the Apprenticeship Office, we didn't really look too much at the training contracts as they came in the door. As I said, we get 120 training contracts a day come in the door. We didn't really look too stringently at them. Often what we would do, something would happen down the track, at the training contract, and we'd retrospectively go, well, why did we register this in the first place? So we saw that as a significant risk. So what we've done is put some checks and balances at the front gate. So as these training contracts are coming in the door, we use a high-risk approach, identifying the training contracts, and we look at a number of things. So those dot points there sort of outline them. So we look at making sure that the qualification fits the intended occupation. I can give you 1,000 examples where that doesn't necessarily happen. Warehousing qualifications come in the door where the employer doesn't even have a warehouse, for example. There's a whole range of weird and wonderful things that we're starting to find with some of these training contracts that come in the door. Making sure the employer has the adequate training facilities, that sort of goes back to that point. Facilities and supervision, these are obligations of the training contract. If you're going to sign into one of these training contracts, you must have adequate supervision. You must be providing, this is the employer I'm talking about, must be providing adequate relevant training to the vocation. So there's some of the things we look at. We look at visa eligibility. 457 visas are a good one. We get lots of 457, or not lots, but a significant number of 457 people, or people on 457 visas applying to do apprenticeships and traineeships, which may not be appropriate. Lots of times it's not appropriate, given that the 457 is a skilled visa. They come out here under a specific skill, and then they're entering into training contracts. Often the visa doesn't meet the nominal term of the training contract, so the nominal term may be 3 years, 4 years. The visa may only go for 1 year. We can't register those training contracts. So there's a whole range of things that we look at the visa. And the last point is about making sure that it's consistent with the objects of the Act. So that's pretty broad. The objects of the Act say that we must run an efficient and effective training sector. Sometimes the training contracts we get in the door are inconsistent with that. So we're doing a little bit more work on that. We're doing lots more checks and balances at the gateway, asking questions about whether these training contracts are fit for purpose or not. And as I said, we're discovering all sorts of weird and wonderful things. So this is another area, and this does relate to training providers, and this is completion of the training contract. So the onus when the training contract is completed is on the RTO to notify the department. And again, what the statute says is that within 21 days of little Johnny or little Sally finishing their training, you must notify the department. Failure to meet that time frame may delay. It causes, again, it's this cumulative effect when we're not notified. Delays in certification, delays of employment, distorting training statistics, causes all sorts of havoc. So in 2012, again, large number of non-compliance, 1,425 non-completions. So they were floating around there in the system. We don't know what the status of them are. Again, we're going to do some more work in that space as well. All these compliance things that I'm talking about all carry penalties, and we could go out there and penalise everybody if we wanted to, but again, our approach is education and prevention of this non-compliance. Some changes going forward. We're putting out a lot more information on our websites about being nice and transparent about our processes, flowcharts, case studies, fact sheets, FAQs. So I encourage you to have a look at our website if you haven't already. We like to be nice and transparent about what we do, how we do it, the way in which we go about our business. We don't want it. We've got no hidden agendas. We're not targeting anyone in particular. It's about quality and integrity within the system. So those documents are designed to provide clarity of our assessment processes, as I said, and just to educate and guide stakeholders as much as possible. That's our details. Anybody got any questions or queries? Or
It's really more by way of feedback about, I mean, one of the issues, we were audited with training plans and we were not compliant, and some aspects of the training plans I think are just a bit, ridiculous really. We were non-compliant in not identifying trainers going 4 years forward in an apprenticeship, for particular units, and the way we specified how they might be trained in those units 4 years ahead. Now the reality is we don't even know if the people will be with us. So there's some aspects of it that are just not, they're not sensible. Yeah,
I get what you're saying. I guess the way we view the training plan is that it is really an organic document. I hate that word, but it is. And it's something that evolves, throughout the training. So yeah, the trainer may change, the student may change their competencies or what have you. So look, I think, agree with you that sometimes we need to do better in terms of our approach to stakeholders and not be too sort of hit people over the heads. But at the same time, I really encourage anyone who's a training provider to really look at that document and use it as a really sort of organic document that sort of grows and expands and contracts depending on how the training evolves over the course of that training contract. So yeah, take your point, definitely.
Do you have a template of training plans?
Good question. There is a national training plan that's been agreed to by pretty much every other state except Western Australia for some unknown reason. And I think it is on our website. So there is a sort of national template of a training plan. So yeah, and we've got guidelines, fact sheets about the training plans on our website as well about what the requirements are, etc. But yeah, we don't sort of mandate that you must use a particular training plan. Again, it's up to you. The regulations, as I said, are fairly prescriptive. It sets out who's undertaking the training, where the training is going to take place, fairly straightforward, but how the training plan is formatted or what have you, it's largely up to the training provider. But there is a national template, so you should look out for that, I guess, if you're interested in a more consistent national approach.
Thank you.
I was interested to hear that the turnaround was 6 days for contracts. I've waited up to 2 months, 3 months.
Yep.
And that is actually cut into the traineeships time. So, of course, we have to have time at the end. So I was just saying, that 6 days probably was quite good in December 2012, but
yeah, often
that doesn't happen these days.
Well, often there's a bit of confusion. So as I said, the ASIN, just understanding how the process works, the ASIN does the sign-up of the training contract. Often those training contracts come into us incomplete, not the requisite information on them, etc., and we send them back to the ASIN provider. I think in the TRS system you can't see whether we've sent them back or not to the ASIN provider. Often we've sent them back and said, go out and refill it out again or get that information on the training contract. So it looks as though it's been with us. And so often the delay sort of sits with us, but in reality it's back with the ASIN provider. We're doing quite a lot of work with those providers. We meet with them monthly, and we hope to have a new system up by the end of this year. We're building a new system, so some of those glitches in the system will be a bit more transparent to the stakeholders. But I can assure you, we measure those training contracts as they come in the door, when they're actually fully filled out, etc. Often they're back with the ASIN provider, and there's delays between the Commonwealth and us.
So is there feedback from the Australian Apprenticeship Centre back to the RTOs? Is it the RTO, is the problem with the RTO?
No.
Or is with it the...
Remember, with the RTOs aren't party to this training contract. The training contract's between the apprentice and the employer. So the RTOs don't really become involved in that training contract per se until we register it. Once we register it, then we send notification to the RTO saying, are you willing to train Johnny or Sally? So again, often those delays or those glitches in the system aren't sort of seen by the stakeholders. They just assume that it's with the department and it's our delay. I can assure you we monitor those training contracts come in the door all the time, making sure that we keep those delays to a minimum. But often it's back with the ASIN provider.
Can I ask another question? Is that all right? One of the issues that are coming up in the last few years, especially with the downturn in the economy and things like that, is some of the employers are taking on traineeships as, shall I say, a form of cheap labour, and they aren't actually giving the trainee time at work to complete, and that's one thing that is an issue for me and my trainee. I've just had someone pull out because the workplace doesn't give them any time and absolutely loads them up with, like supervisory work when they're only a Cert 3 trainee.
Yeah, look, it's an issue, and again, it goes back to that fundamental principle about quality. Again, I can't implore you enough, if you're in the training sector, to use that training plan to your advantage. It should set out the on and off the job training components, and if the employer isn't fulfilling their obligations one way or another, certainly get in touch with us, and we will send people out to the enterprise and talk to the employer directly. We do that all the time as a matter of course. Speak to employers about the quality and about making sure that they're fulfilling their obligations. Because again, fundamentally, the training contract is between the employer and the trainee or the apprentice. They sign up to agree to a whole bunch of obligations under that training contract, and then there's the regulation framework that sits over the top of it. So there's a whole bunch of things that they have to adhere to, and if they're not, I encourage you to let us know, and we can go out and have those chats.
Just following up on that one, with the school-based trainees, when they're in the workplace, the amount of training, I suppose, you say on the training plans they should have outlined how much is on the job and off the job training.
Yep.
My issue is that we've got employers who request the students to come in not on their work day and want them to come in and train and don't pay them. So that would... To me, that's not allowed.
Yep.
So who has... I mean, as a representative for the student, I argue with the employers, but whose responsibility is it to make sure that the employer is informed well enough so that they are not taking advantage of the students?
Good question, and there's probably two parts to this. Again, one of the key obligations under the training contract, if that employer is signing into a training contract, is to pay the apprentice trainee. So that if they're breaching that obligation, they've breached the training contract. You should let us know about that. But prior to sign up, the ASIN really should be engaging in those conversations, setting out what the obligations are, what they're signing into, etc., etc. So that's their role. But thirdly, we're also doing some work about maybe amending or adjusting one of the regulations. So the training plan, if it's a school-based traineeship or apprenticeship, that the school is a signatory to that training plan as well. Okay, so we don't want to lobby the school because they've got enough regulations, etc. But we do, if they're an interested party, and they are clearly, they should be a signatory to that training plan as well. So all parties know what's going on.
I have addressed this issue with an ASIN, And his response was that the employer does provide on-the-job training, so they fulfil their requirements. And he was quite loath to upset the employer. And I said, well, you know, unless you back up the student, who is, you know, sort of, I can only say so much. You know, someone needs to be able to put those things in place and make sure that the employers are clear and that the student doesn't get put under pressure, because quite often they come back to the student and say, well, you're coming in on Tuesday.
Yeah, I agree. And look, again, if you've got issues or what have you, let us know and we'll go and investigate them. You know, and the problem with us being the regulator is that when we do step in and have those conversations, we get accused of not supporting training and this, that and the other. But as I said, I can't say this clear enough. The obligations under the training contract are really quite clear. You must pay the apprentice. You must give them time off to go and do their off-the-job training. You must do X, Y and Z. So if there's any of those, if you think that they're not being met or fulfilled, let us know and we'll look into it.
One of the projects that I work on across the college, well in the Geraldton region here, is training journals, which actually outline the training that needs to be done for each unit. So the integration of that and also the progression of the wage salary through each of those units, isn't that something that we could use to track with that training plan? I mean, that's something where everyone should have a...
It's a good question, because I've actually been looking at the New South Wales model and they talk about training journals quite a bit. And I think, again, while it's not the regulation or the regulatory documents are the training plan and the training contract, I think any record keeping of what training has or hasn't occurred or are good things, whether that's the RTO, the employer, the apprentice, because often through the course of the training contracts things get lost, there's one person claiming one thing, the employer's claiming another thing, so any of that record keeping is a good thing. The problem for us, or imposing another document to regulate and another imposition on business, I can tell you the government they're all in the business of red tape reduction. So I think it's a great idea, and I would encourage training journals, people to keep them, but I don't think the government's got a flavour. They're all in the business of red tape reduction as opposed to putting another regulatory burden on stakeholders. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think that's it. Thank you very much for coming.
Authorised by the Government of Western Australia, Perth.